Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed Live. We are super excited to have you joining us today from wherever you're streaming from, whether it's YouTube, Twitch, Learn TV, or Twitter, or anywhere else, or if you're joining from the Microsoft Reactor. We are excited to have you here today to talk about the latest Azure SQL news updates for August 2021. So that being said, I did want to give a quick reminder that we are looking at your questions. So from wherever you're streaming from, we are taking questions, comments. You want to say hi, you want to say some announcement is cool, just let us know. We are happy to kind of help you out. And today, oh, hi, Harish. Thanks for joining us. And thanks everyone else for joining us. Today, we have quite a few special guests to talk about all the various product updates that we've had in the past month. And just as a reminder, every time we stream our news updates, that's my PowerPoint slide. It has a mind of its own today, but every time we stream the live news updates, there's a blog that goes along with it. So you can go ahead and head over to aka.ms/newsupdate, and that's going to have the latest blog that contains all of the references that you might hear or see today. So with that being said, I want to get right into some of the updates before I bring on some of our awesome guests. The first update that I had is kind of a small update, but I think there's more to it. It's this change from the AMP program to the AMMP program. So what does that mean? That means that the Azure Migration Program has expanded to include modernization. So this means you can get help from Microsoft, regardless of your size of your organization or the project or the workload that you're trying to modernize or migrate, and we will assist you with that. I definitely recommend kind of getting involved with this program, regardless of how much help you may or may not need. It's just a great free program, and there's no reason to not be involved if you're thinking about migrating and modernizing or you've already started. And I think this evolution to kind of add an M to the program just signifies how much we're really investing in this. And there's a few other updates kind of related to this. One was extended security updates for SQL Server 2012, as well as one more year for SQL Server 2008 R2. Hopefully not that many of viewers are on that version, but if you are, the only place you can get these free extended security updates is if you're running on Azure and either leveraging one of our pre-built images that include SQL Server or the SQL Server IaaS extension. So we recently did some episodes on Data Exposed about this if you want to learn more about what that is. And I'm also going to point to a few different blogs because this has kind of been a hot topic with the announcement of the end of support for SQL Server 2012 coming in July 2022. I have that exact date later for you all. Okay, so the next update that we have is just our product update. So I wanted to start with our GA announcements, and then we'll go into the public preview announcements. But one cool thing to note about all these announcements, with the exception of the first one, which is always encrypted with secure enclaves and SQL DB, this went GA last month. And we actually had Jakob on, I think the month before last when this went public preview, and he gave us a demo. So you already have some information there if you want to go watch a demo, learn more about always encrypted with secure enclaves. But for all of the other announcements that you see on this screen, I have brought some special guest and leader to come on to talk to us about what exactly it is that's new and what that means for you as a customer or an organization or just someone who's interested in Azure SQL. So with that being said, we're going to get right into some of the updates for Hyperscale. And for this, I'm going to bring on Denzil. Denzil, thanks so much for joining us today. Before we get, kind of into what you're going to talk to us about what's new, I'd love if you could give our viewers kind of a brief intro of what you do. Classic mistake. You are muted, my friend.
Yep. Thank you. So I'm a program manager in the Hyperscale team. So I oversee a bunch of the Hyperscale improvements. And Hyperscale is our future. It's the newest tier from a SQL DB perspective and helps scalability from small databases to large databases with separation of compute and storage. So we are excited to kind of talk about Hyperscale. We are excited about all the features we're bringing to it in order to make it um, comparable to other tiers. We were lagging in a few features, and we're quickly closing the gaps.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, let's talk about some of the latest updates.
Sure. So the first one we have is storage redundancy choices, or backup storage redundancy choices in particular, and that is in public preview, right now. So this gives the user choice for compliance reasons, for data residency requirements, and you can have a choice between three storage choices. The default is RAGRS, which is geo-redundant storage, which means that your backups are paired with the paired region. So they're replicated to the paired region, that Azure chooses, and you have functionality such as geo restore. So it's a disaster recovery type of scenario where if your primary region does go down, you can restore from a geo-replicated backup. So that's the default. But for compliance reasons, there are residency requirements that your data has to be within a region. So we do allow now the choices of LRS and ZRS. LRS is locally redundant storage. So your storage account is within a region. The difference between LRS and ZRS is the storage account copies are spread across multiple availability zones for higher availability. So one distinction in Hyperscale, though this is backup storage redundancy, all the Hyperscale backups are from snapshots. So kind of the data follows the backup almost, because from a snapshot's perspective, your storage account where the data resides and the snapshot resides have to be of the same type. So choosing one, indirectly implies you're choosing the other. So at public preview, we have a configurable option for new databases. If you want to change an existing Hyperscale database, then you have to migrate it with one of the few options with dbcopy or pitter or geo-replication. And the primary reason is, like I said, it's not just a choice of where your backup resides, but it's a size of data operation from the perspective of you've got to now copy into a different storage account type. So that's backup storage redundancy. We hope you try it out if you need mandate it and give us feedback on how that works. The second feature I'm excited to say is generally available is database copy. And database copy has been in preview for a few months now. And there are some key differences from a database copy on other tiers. So database copy on other tiers are generally a transactionally consistent copy of data, but it is a size of data operation. In Hyperscale, there's a difference based on if you're doing a copy within region or out of region. So within region, we do a constant type copy. So the copy is from a snapshot, and copies are extremely fast. So think of them more as clones. So a scenario where you want to do a fast copy for dev test, and I have some numbers on the latest test I did just before GA. So you can take a 9.4 terabyte, or for that matter, a 50 terabyte database, and the copy within region was around the 12-minute mark. Right, so because they are from snapshot, so the snapshot copies are super fast. It's more of the provisioning type for the resources and so on and so forth. And then copies out of region, or as we talked about with backup storage redundancy, copies to a different account type will be a size of data operation. And when I say a size of data, it's not proportional to the size itself, because we have the concept of page servers, which are 128 gig chunks, and those are copied in parallel. So it's faster than the size of it. It's not proportional to the size, but it is definitely slower than kind of a within region copy from a clone. So the good thing is, because the copy is at the storage account level, there's no impact to the source DB. So it's not like you're copying data from the source database. So this is in GA. Would love kind of feedback. Hope you try it out, and hope you adopt Hyperscale.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Denzil. Just one follow-up question, just because
Sure.
we haven't talked about Hyperscale a ton on the show recently. Like, for people kind of like moving or kind of looking into these new capabilities, do you have any advice for them?
I mean, moving to the hyperscale tier is just a tier operation. So you can update a tier from business critical to hyperscale or general purpose to hyperscale. So the performance characteristics of hyperscale are a little different because the architecture is distributed. We are, it's cloud native in a way that allows us to scale to 100 terabytes. But there are some differences in performance characteristics. And for now, it is a one-way street. So as you're migrating and testing your workloads, I would strongly recommend kind of making a copy of your original, then migrating it up and testing workloads. But we've seen some great success. We've got some large customers, large databases that we couldn't support in other tiers because they were limited by kind of the size of the hardware on a single node, which it isn't on hyperscale.
Awesome, cool. Thanks so much, Denzil. I think we have some episodes on Data Exposed coming up, so for our viewers, stay tuned. You'll see Denzil again. Thanks again so much,
Thank you,
Denzil.
Anna. Yep.
Thanks. Awesome. So that's cool. Hyperscale is always a really cool topic to me because we re-architected SQL Server to be kind of cloud native. So very cool. Always fun to hear from the Hyperscale team. I think last month we had Davide on to talk about named replicas. So the team is definitely innovating very quickly, which is always really cool to see. Speaking of innovations, the next innovation we're going to be talking about is the Spark 3 connector for SQL Server. Now, this is not something I know very much about. So I am going to bring up Daniel to tell us a little bit more about it. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone, or evening or afternoon. So I am Daniel Coelho. I'm a program manager at SQL Server Big Data Clusters team. Today, we're going to talk about a little bit on what SQL Server Big Data Cluster is real quickly. And then we're going to step in and say what is the Spark 3 connector for the SQL Server, what it brings to the table, and looking ahead what's going to bring to the table.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I mean, we haven't really talked a ton about big data clusters on the show recently, so it would be great to hear kind of an overview, make sure we all know what's going on.
Okay. So SQL Server Big Data Clusters allows you to deploy SQL Server, Spark, and HDFS components on top of Kubernetes. So the big differentiator is that if you are on premises or you're in a hybrid cloud situation where the only thing that you have is a Kubernetes to perform analytics and transactional, you can use SQL Server Big Data Cluster on top of Kubernetes platform. Once you deploy it, it works with standard Kubernetes API. We do support partner integrations like OpenShift and Tanzu and whatnot. They're all compatible platforms because we basically support Kubernetes standard API. You're going to have an endpoints for a SQL Server master with additional capabilities like data pool and whatnot. I'm going to talk a little bit that on the slide. And you're going to have Spark. So either way, you're going to have a couple of endpoints, SQL and Spark. So you can perform like advanced big data manipulation scenarios and machine learning. So looking at the slide, thank you. It is a lot. I'm going to talk specifically about the Spark connector, but basically when you deploy big data clusters, this is what you get in the backend. So you get an entry point with a master a SQL Server instance. You get the scale out capabilities of Polybase that we call the compute pool, and the data pool, which are kind of scale out capabilities on top of a SQL Server, and adds in a lot of kind of data virtualization capabilities so you can connect externally to external data sources like Oracle, MongoDB, and whatnot, to decide which data you're going to bring in and which data you're just going to query remote. So this is the SQL Server part. And then you have as well the Spark capabilities. So it looks disconnected, right? So you get two separate endpoints. How do I bring those things together? That's where the Spark connector for SQL Server kicks in. So if you want to know more, before I move on the slide, so if you want to know more about big data clusters, what it is, all the scenarios it kind of solves, please check out the documentation as I provided on the top. And it's going to give you like an introduction. It is a very large Surface product, so it takes some time to get acquainted with it. So, but it gives a great overview, step-by-step, building up on all those components that I've laid out on the screen. So if you're a data scientist or a data engineer, mostly a data engineer that needs to, move data back and forth between, the HDFS and Spark on top of it, and to the other side, SQL or Azure SQL or any kind of SQL server, basically the way you do it generally, you have a JDBC connection between the Spark driver and the database. So what happens is if you have like a Spark job with hundreds of executors that needs to move data around, and the only thing you have is a standard JDBC driver, you're going to funnel into that driver and you're going to get a very severe performance impact. What the Spark connector brings to the table is that individual Spark executors are able to connect directly to SQL Server and partition the data movement in and out. So what you get by just installing the connector into your Spark application, which is in the case of SQL Server Big Data Cluster is by default, what you get is you can use from the Spark session SQL Server as a data sink and as a data source in a distributed way, in a performant way. Of course, you can control the number of parallelism that you're looking at. Imagine that you're integrating a Spark job towards Azure SQL DB. You can't use like 100 executors to connect to SQL DB. You need to understand the trade-offs of going wide versus going tall. But in general, that's the capability that the Spark connector gives you. Ability to use on any Spark language like Scala, Python, and R, and of course Spark SQL. Any Spark engine. We have a lot of customers that actually use Databricks and HD Insights to actually just install the connector, because the connector is basically a Maven coordinate. It's open source. It's on GitHub. You can track the link for GitHub, the GitHub project over there, and install whatever. The additional capabilities that the connector gives you are Active Directory support. So it's not only basic authentication, you can actually install and use certificates and do the whole Active Directory way of doing things. And the one extra capability is actually reorder data frame support. So imagine that the Spark job spawns hundreds of executors with partitions of data, and you need to either either read from or write to SQL Server, and you won't be very opinionated on the order that you either read or write. It gives you that capability to do that in a performant way. No other connector do that.
That's pretty cool. I had no idea, and what I didn't know is that you can use it for BDC, but you can also use it for anything else. So this just seems really useful in general, but also specific to BDC.
Basically, if you have a Spark, a standard Spark installation, you can basically use the Maven coordinates, which is a standard way of loading packages into Spark, and just pull that in, and you're good to go.
Cool.
So what we brought together on late last month was the general availability of the Spark 3.0 support. So that's it's a major bump in terms of being compatible with Spark 3.0. Was like in late July. We had like a huge blog post, and a lot of Databricks customers were really pushing for it. People that usually use cloud service their voices are heard first, right? So BDC is mostly it's targeted at private clouds and on-premises scenarios. So the feedback channel is a little bit different than cloud-based ones. But we got a lot of feedback on and push for people. Okay, get me Spark 3.0. And now they're pushing, of course, for Spark 3.1 and the soon-to-be Spark 3.2. And we already have that on the roadmap, targeting a little bit down this year. Just 1 second. Okay. We are also making the commitment in terms of engineering resources to track a little bit closely on the Spark releases. So as soon as Spark release comes in, we go there and just update the connector as well. Two callouts that I want to do, kind of looking forward, that I want to be calling out is that there is ongoing developments in enable Aeroflight connections towards SQL Server. Aeroflight is a gRPC endpoint, very fast, and target at analytic scenarios that just move the data super fast in columnar format. And this is an ongoing trend for analytics. We are tracking the developments there on the SQL Server side, and as soon as SQL Server delivers the endpoint and that whole component set kind of moves on, we will be upgrading the connector to take advantage of that. I would just call out that the speed bumps for using the connector are usually tenfold, but it really depends on the scenario that you're using. It depends on the scalability of the SQL Server endpoint. So you need to be, it's very hard to lay out some numbers because it really depends on the scenario. And the other thing that I want to call out is the versioning standard. What that means is that when we started with the development of the connector, we used, we were not very aligned with kind of Maven coordinates kind of versioning standards. And what happens now when we release the Spark 3.0 compatible connector is that we now have some Maven coordinates that we wouldn't like people to continue using, right? So this is very well documented on the GitHub page and on the Microsoft documentation for the connector. But I just wanted to highlight that one. So if you're willing to pull the connectors into your Spark applications and take advantage of all those speeds and all those capabilities, just make sure that you use the top ones as soon as you search for them on Maven, if you're not coming directly from the documentation or the GitHub page.
Awesome. That's definitely a good call out. I am guilty of sometimes using the wrong version of things. Is there any big difference between the two that you said that we should use?
So on the versioning schemes, right? So basically, as you can see, the latest version from the top one and the third row are 1.0.2. They are the same components. When we updated both. So they are the same. But the Maven coordinate is using a naming pattern that's not encouraged. We basically locked in the Spark version on the naming standard of the artifact ID. And that's kind of not a good practice in general. So we're fading away from that. We're not going to pull, we could have, right? But we're not going to pull the artifact out of Maven because it would break people
right
up. So we're just kind of encouraging people to use right. And as soon as the data points, because we get stats on that kind of every month. So as soon as the data shows that, okay, people are not using those ones anymore, we're going to pull them out.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that makes sense. And it makes sense to kind of follow the best practices naming and get out of that. Awesome. This has been really useful, Daniel. I learned a lot. Personally, I want to go check this out and play with it because I haven't played with it yet. Do you have any tips for people who are just getting started with the Spark connector?
So the Spark connector is supposed to be very frictionless. So if you are already using Spark, and in your Spark code, you have data dependency towards SQL Server. It's just a matter of changing the class that you're calling in.
Okay.
And you get, with that, you have many more options. But if you do nothing and just inherit the new class name, you're probably going to be getting the benefits out of it. And then you go and research into it and see, what other capabilities you can actually leverage to speed up your code. But the process is really simple. Just go to GitHub, understand the Maven artifact ID, and add that to whatever Spark platform that you are using.
Awesome.
Hopefully,
cool.
Hopefully big data clusters.
Hopefully big data clusters. Nice plug there. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on the show, telling us about big data clusters, telling about these new connectors, and even a sneak peek at what you guys are going to be working on next. Just thanks so much, and we hope to have you on the show again sometime soon.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Awesome. So that was Daniel. Very cool stuff. I'm going to agree with some of our commenters, some of our people on Twitch saying this is cool for sure. Some other people have commented on the versioning scheme for Scala. We got one, Spark in the versioning. Not sure what that means, how to interpret that, but cool. Okay, so moving on. We do have more guests coming, but I wanted to spend some time and talk to you all about the latest blogs and videos. Now, again, you all are all familiar that we have so many blogs and so many places where updates get posted. So in this segment, I just kind of pull all the ones that are related to Azure SQL and SQL Server, give you some highlights, and I even try out some things. So let's get right into it. So the first one I wanted to start with is the Azure blog. So this is kind of our higher level executive style blog. You see a lot of executives here. Yeah, so let's talk about what's here. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is Mark Rusinovich, who is, famous in the IT pro dev world for all of his research and efforts that he's doing. He's also the CTO of Azure, but he's been doing Advancing Reliability series. And in this series, he basically asks various leaders to explain various techniques to prevent and monitor technical issues. So there's two here, the first one and the last one. The VM one, the reason I pulled this one is he talks about resource help, which you can access for your SQL VMs, your virtual machines, even your databases and managed instances. But specifically here, he's talking about how they decide to surface things in the resource help for VM and how it can be very useful for understanding the transparency of different issues that might arise for your virtual machine or your general services. The last one I found really interesting. It's called Advancing Resiliency Threat Modeling for Large Distributed Systems. And this one's interesting because he talks about how we manage the living risks threat model. So I thought this was about injection attacks or, cyber attacks or other things like that. But really what this is about is how, as Azure as a platform, how do they manage this large distributed system, and how do they do both preactive and reactive kind of risk modeling to prevent or react to outages. So I found this one really interesting. I think our HADR folks might be interested in how Azure does this at such a large scale. Yeah, someone says awesome. Yeah, I think it's pretty awesome too. So thanks for your comment. The other blogs here, just to touch on a few of them, that second one on Azure migration and modernization, that's a deep dive on that new AMMP program with the extra M, as well as the blog by JG. He's talking about the same sort of thing, but he is focusing on our Azure data product. So that's a good one to kind of double click onto what we're doing for Azure data. The other thing I wanted to share is Erin Chappell and her team released something called this Inside Azure for IT, sorry. So if I go over to that blog, it points to this new page, Inside Azure for IT. And I think for our IT pros, y'all are probably really gonna like this. It's a new session, new kind of page or initiative that has these Ask the Experts live sessions. So you can see the calendar, you can see fireside chats. And another interesting thing I thought y'all would like is the expert series. So we've got a few different expert series, and this is all, oh, my page isn't loading, but this is all pretty new. So I would watch this space. I have a feeling you're going to see a lot more turn up here, maybe a SQL Server on Azure section, if I was being biased and express what I would like to see here. But we'll see. So just watch this space. We'll see what happens. The only other blog up here is Daniel's blog about the GA announcement of the Spark 3.0 connector, which you guys already are pros at. But if you want to double click into any of the things there, I put a link to this blog in the news update. So that's something to check out. All right, moving right along to talk about data exposed. We've been doing so much in this space. I wanted to actually just show you our YouTube channel. Hopefully this is something you all have subscribed to already, but if not, go ahead and head over. Let me grab you that link. Here it is. Head over to our Azure SQL YouTube channel. Go ahead and subscribe. That's going to allow you to get the latest updates when we post new stuff, which is a lot of the times. Just a reminder for those of you that might not be familiar with our show, we release new episodes. These are shorter episodes. You can see that they're less than an hour. We're trying to make them short and sweet so you can get what you need in a short amount of time. And then we have our live episodes, which you're watching one of them right now, but you can see we've got a bunch of different kind of mini live series going on. Now, if we think about what we've done in the last month, it's been a lot of data exposed episodes. So one cool thing I wanted to announce is we've started a VM series on data exposed. I think this is going to be 6 or 7 or 8 episodes, something like that. Mostly with Pamela Hood and David Pless, who've been on the SQL VM live series, but we're going to make these short little videos so you can understand the best practices of running SQL Server in an Azure virtual machine. So that's something to check out. David Klee came on for our MVP edition to talk about storing secrets for Linux. This was kind of mind-blowing to me because I am not familiar with this space, but I learned a lot. I think you guys will enjoy this one. Davide came on, or we did a short episode on named replicas. This one is fascinating to me because it brings a whole new definition to what read scale actually is, because you can deploy up to 30 named replicas. So you can give them a name. They can have a different SKU, so a different amount of vCores than your primary, and you can kind of scale up and down on demand in just, not a size of data operation. So it's just really cool stuff that we're doing there, really helping with read scale if you're doing analytics, if you're doing reporting, and if you're trying to save on cost. So just one more reason, like Hyperscale is just really where a lot of innovation is happening. We also had 2 episodes from Mara Stu. You'll see her a lot actually in this episode because she's doing a ton of data exposed episodes. She's writing a ton of blog posts, evangelizing and helping us understand how to use CDC with Azure SQL database. So that's something to check out for sure. And then Wee Hong Tuk, the lead group program manager for Azure Data Factory, came on to give us some updates. A lot of folks are using Azure Data Factory. So if you aren't, this is a good way to see what's new and kind of what you might be missing out on. Just another highlight I wanted to call out is Azure SQL Database Ledger. If you haven't read about that yet, you want to check this out. It's just so cool. And we did just wrap up a Migrating to SQL mini-series. So if you want to see that series, we've got inline migrations with Azure Data Studio, Azure Migrate, database migration services, some of the new innovations we've done with things like SSMA. That's been really cool. So lots of cool stuff to check out on that front. And then just from a live perspective, I wanted to highlight 2 weeks ago, we did an Azure Data Studio Power Hour. This was crazy. We had so many people doing so many demos, and I learned so much about how to get more out of Azure Data Studio. I can't recommend going and watching this episode enough. And then we had a few other live episodes last month. One with Bob Ward and Buck Woody, where we really dove into the differences between Azure Arc enabled SQL Managed Instance and Azure SQL Managed Instance. And I think that's more relevant than ever since Azure Arc enabled SQL Managed Instance went GA on July 30th. So you want to check that one out too. And then again, I told you we were doing our SQL VM series. All right, so let's go back to the deck. So you've kind of seen all this, and you're going to subscribe to our Azure SQL YouTube channel. Hopefully you already are. And let's move on to talking about the rest of the blog, starting with the SQL Server Tech Community blog. So lots of blogs this month, kind of across the board. So stay with me as I try to give you the highlights after reading all of these blogs. The first one is by Amit Kandwal, and it's a great example of how it's just SQL. So what Amit did is he took this kind of open source solution that the SQL DB and SQL MI team worked on to basically allow you to use open source tools like Telegraph and InfluxDB and Grafana to create these really pretty open source dashboards really easily. And he does it step by step, except applying it to SQL Server on Linux, which I found just really interesting how you can kind of apply these different tools and things we've created across different options in SQL. He goes step by step, and it was really easy. I actually tried to set this up myself, and it was pretty easy, even as someone who isn't a containers or a Linux pro. All right, the next one is the new JDBC driver. If you follow the SQL Server tech community, you see that we post a lot of these updates, whether it's CUs or drivers for JDBC or ODBC. But there's a good reason for that. This one contained a lot of changes, but the one I found the most interesting was the open connection retry feature, which is bringing in new connection properties that you're probably familiar seeing in something like SQL Client. Those are connect retry count and connection retry interval. So again, something to check out. CU update 12 for SQL Server 2019 became available. What's interesting about these CUs is when we release these updates, you can see exactly what was changed. Like for example, this is the CU12, so you can see exactly what we changed, why we changed it, and all the details related to that. So something to check out if you are using SQL Server 2019. ODBC driver, new driver. We're always working on updating these drivers. In that blog, you can find out exactly what was updated. The deploy SQL Server the Ansible way. This was a new one for me. I actually honestly had to look up what that meant. But what I gather is it's an IT automation engine from Red Hat. And it kind of makes sense that that's what it is, because in the blog, Amit, once again, talks about how to set up SQL Server automation using Ansible and Red Hat. So makes sense. The other thing I wanted to show you is that Azure Defender for SQL is now available in the VM blade. So if I hop over to my Azure portal, you can see I have this SQL Server virtual machine. It's actually paused right now. That's why you have all these things grayed out. Typically, you wouldn't want to pause your production SQL Server VM, but here we are. But the new thing is this security blade. So you can now access the security blade from within your SQL virtual machine and see all your security alerts and recommendations. So that's pretty cool now that we have that integrated. All right, let's see. Okay, more CU updates. Or CUs. CU updates is redundant, right? Okay, so moving on to the SQL Server blog, a few things happened here. The first one, Drew explained some of the latest advancements and plans for SQL package and DACFX. That might be very interesting depending on your use case and scenario, so check that one out. Debbie also dives in the second blog to more information about the EOS that I mentioned for SQL Server 2012. The biggest items are that SQL Server 2012 extended support ends on July 12th, 2022. And Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2 extended support will end on October 10th, 2023. So you have a little more time on that Windows Server one. But what I like about this blog is she talks about how you can get those free extended security updates by moving to Azure SQL VMs. It's pretty comprehensive, so it's just useful if this is something your organization is looking at doing sometime in the future. Finally, Daniel, our star who came on the show earlier, he also had a blog about what's new in SQL Server BDC for CU11. And some of the highlights in this include BYOK support for encryption at rest and more Polybase data sources support. So I know Polybase is like the hottest feature right now, has been for a while potentially for SQL Server and SQL Server BDC. So it's cool that you can now access even more data sources quite easily. Let me just take a quick look at the comments. Looks like big data clusters also shipped CU12, so I'm already behind. You can see keeping up with all these things is tough, but hey, we're out here doing our best. Okay, so let's move on to the Azure SQL tech community. I have a few demos, but I'm going to move pretty quickly because I want to make sure we have time for the rest of our guests for today. Some of these you've already seen through our other announcements from Secure Enclaves as well as Denzil on Hyperscale. Mara, I mentioned this earlier, she's doing a series on CDC, so lots of blogs, lots of videos to check out and learn more about that. I wanted to highlight something that I saw from Nico. Nico's a relatively new member to the Managed Instance team, and he's been working a lot on helping us get the word out, helping us clear the message on how to use SQL Managed Instance. And what he did is he did these 3 blog posts, which I turned into a notebook from Nico. I just kind of took the code segments from them. And what he does is just very basic things, but I found it very interesting. So for example, how to find the MI service tier basic details with T-SQL. So you might be familiar with this idea of an engine edition. And so it's just kind of cool, especially if you're like newer to Managed Instance or evaluating Managed Instance. It shows you how to get things like the service tier, the hardware generation, other things. And then he did another blog about 3 different ways to get the number of vCores that your Managed Instance has deployed. So these are all kind of coming through with the same response. I know I'm going really quickly. I want you guys to go read the blog, check it out for yourself, and try it. And then he also did one on finding the total amount of RAM for your Azure SQL Managed Instance. So cool to check out. Definitely go check out his blog. I had fun and learned some stuff while going through it, so I think you all will too. The other blog I wanted to highlight was one from Danny, also from the SQL Managed Instance team. And he put together this blog, and again, I just stole the code segments and threw them into a notebook. And what it does is it shows you how to basically use an external table on Azure SQL Managed Instance to read data from Azure SQL database. And I was able to just follow these commands and set this up super easily. You can see it's not that many commands. You connect to SQL DB and create authentication credentials, and then you basically go through that, creating an external data source process and an external table. And ultimately, you're able to query SQL database from Azure SQL Managed Instance. So I thought that was pretty cool too. So another thing to check out and try on your MIs and DBs, or if you haven't before. All right, finally, I know you guys are getting tired of me. Finally, before our next guest, we had 2 blogs on the Azure Database Support blog that were SQL related. The first one I found interesting. It was this error, and the error basically can be solved by importing the required certificates to enable a Java application to connect to Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL Managed Instance. This blog steps through how to address that error. So pretty specific, but if this is something you're dealing with, it's going to be pretty important. And then the second one was pretty interesting too. It talked about how you can use extended events to capture deletion operations. So also a very interesting one. So that's all the blogs. That's all, just a few that we had. Hopefully that was useful. In my blog, you'll have links to all the other blogs. So if you want to dive deeper into any of those topics, you definitely can do so. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring on a guest. And the reason I wanted to bring on this guest is a few reasons. One, I just like this guest, so that's good. But the other reason is that Azure Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance went generally available on July 30th. My first question was really like, how do you get started with this thing? So I wanted to bring on Lior from the Jumpstart team. Hey, Lior, how's it going?
Hey, Anna. Good to be back.
Good to have you back. Yeah, you're becoming almost a regular. So
it is what it is.
It is what it is. For those folks who haven't seen you on the show before, can you give us a brief introduction of what you do?
Yeah. So my name is Lior Kamrat. I'm an architect in our partner solutions division. Basically, I'm the lead for everything that is hybrid practices for our partners inside the US. And a big part of it is our strategy around Azure Arc, the technical enablement, and also part of my charter is also communicate a lot with the field and really just spread the love. So that's really part of what I do.
Awesome. Yeah, we are happy to have you on the show, and thank you for all that you're doing for our community and our field. Today we're going to be talking about Azure Arc Jumpstart, and I tried to come up with a really bad pun. I was going to say, what is Azure Arc Jumpstart, and how do I get jump started? But then I just couldn't do it with a serious face.
No one can, really. So you're in a good place. I mean, so Yeah, I mean the Jumpstart project. We've been we've been out there for a while now. It's been a project that's been going on for I want to say 17 months now, and really from the early days of Azure Arc, and Azure Arc started with Azure Arc enabled server, then Kubernetes, data services, ML, all this stuff are coming to life. It's a super interesting space, right? Because it's moving super fast. It's insane, and it's also the I've been to Microsoft for 6 years now, and it's probably the space that has the most collaboration points between teams. So it's kind of insane. And the Jumpstart project is really our way to bring Azure Arc to the masses. So today, what I wanted to talk about is our July release, and maybe do a bit of a recap on what we did. And I also wanted to focus on the data stuff that happened in the July release, and also share with the audience some of the things that we are coming up with, and also have a quick, cute demo to show you on some of this stuff. So to get things going, I wanted to share that in this release, like the July release, and for those of you that are not following the project, we're moving in 1 month iterations, right? So these are our sprints, and every sprint we are coming up with a set of scenarios and optimizations and whatnot for the projects. And in this release, the July release, because like you mentioned, Anna, Azure Arc Data Services went through a major milestone with the general availability of SQL Managed Instance in the general purpose tier. Obviously, we have the business critical coming up, but we focused a lot on the data services side of things in this release because we wanted to make sure that all the scenarios that we developed throughout these months are now up to date with the latest features and capabilities. So the biggest capability is the directly connected mode. And for those of you that are not familiar with directly connected mode when it comes to Azure Arc enabled data services, it's basically the notion of really deploying Azure Arc enabled data services like SQL MI and PostgreSQL, Hyperscale or Citus outside of Azure into Kubernetes, but doing that in a directly connected fashion, meaning that those resources, those services, data services that you are deploying outside of Azure on whatever Kubernetes cluster that you may have, those will be projected as first-class citizens right off the back as Azure resources. And we wanted to make sure that this scenario supports that. So in this release, we updated 15 scenarios. Like all the scenarios that we had in the Jumpstart went through a revision to support directly connected mode with the GA bits. So that was a huge update. And as part of that optimization, we also wanted to implement a modular or streamlined modular approach. That's how we call it. And I'll show you what it means in a second here. We also released a new demo to our YouTube channel. So the Jumpstart has its own YouTube channel with a lot of these snackable videos. We also have our show Jumpstart Lightning as part of it, right? We're talking to people, about their data experience, like the hybrid data experience. And we wanna understand better what they do. So again, the YouTube channel, we released a new demo for SQL Managed Instance on top of Google Kubernetes Engine. So pretty cool demo. Go check it out. And Jumpstart ArcBox. ArcBox is a byproduct of the Jumpstart project, right? It's one of those products that we have as part of the project. And ArcBox is a opinionated sandbox. That's how we like to call it, which will give you all the Azure Arc capabilities in your own subscription, your own Azure subscription in a single resource group, one place to rule them all. So you will get Azure Arc enabled servers capabilities, Kubernetes, and of course, data services with Postgres and SQL. And also we updated ArcBox to make sure that it does support directly connected mode, like the rest of the individual scenarios that I was referring to. So these are really the highlights of the things that we worked on. And I wanted to share also what are the things that we are working on when it comes to data services, because this space is just insane. I saw the blog post that you shared in a few minutes ago, and I saw all the touch points and connections that I have to this type of blog post when it comes to the data. No pun intended, to the data that people are actually highlighting. And I saw something around the Grafana stuff, so I'll show that as well as part of this short demo. But really, when it comes to what is it that we're coming up next is we're going to start working on Azure Arc enabled machine learning scenarios. So we're expecting for that to go and be available for our readers in this iteration, actually. So hopefully by the end of August, we're going to have those scenarios already available in the Jumpstart. SQL Managed Instance, high availability. So again, GA for SQL Managed Instance in the general purpose, but we're also working on the business critical tier, right? Which brings high availability capabilities, availability groups, right? So we're working on scenarios that will highlight that. Super cool stuff, very interesting to see that in the Kubernetes space, right? And how things are coming to life and how do you actually go by and approach high availability. And the last thing, the Jumpstart is not designed to be like your go-to for production deployments. But having said that, we're trying to bring a POC, what I like to call a POC production-like experience, right? And as part of it, we want to make sure that people will have the right workbooks, the benchmark tools, the stress testing, the dashboards that honestly, a lot of the times they are being missed when it comes to POCs, right? Because you want to, like, sometimes those operational aspects are something that people tends to skip because they want to see, okay, so I want to see the SQL, and these are the people that have SQL queries running in their veins. But like honestly, when it comes to Azure Arc-enabled data services, there is so much more that needs to be considered, and we want to bring that to the masses when it comes to this scenario. So these are the things that we are working on.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear all the new scenarios and all that y'all are working on. Quick question, Lior, like, how do y'all decide which scenarios you're going to go kind of tackle next?
Yeah. We work with the product groups. Like, we're literally an extension to the product group when it comes to the Jumpstart project. So we're getting a lot of feedback and data coming from the actual product groups because they're talking to a lot of customers, like ourselves, but they're talking to a lot of customers and they're talking to a lot of partners. So we're collecting a lot of data, but we're also working with our customer success unit friends and the entire partners division colleagues to make sure that we're getting all the information that is possible, because there is a lot of information flowing in, and then we're starting to prioritize and understand what is critical, what is less critical, what is closer to GA, what is maybe we can hold off on this one, and that's really the thought process. And at the end of the day, we're just doing the planning and voting on prioritization, and at that point, we're off to the races and start to code and start to write these scenarios.
Cool, awesome. It's kind of cool to get an inside look onto how you guys are doing that. Hey, I'd love to take a look if you have anything to show us.
Yes. So this is the Jumpstart project. This is the homepage for the Jumpstart project, and I just wanted to open the data services page. So as you can see, these are all the Kubernetes flavors that I was mentioning in the release notes overview. And these are the Kubernetes flavors that we support. So you can see, like, if I just go to Kubernetes Cluster API, you can see that we have the data controller. This is like the vanilla deployments, right? Only the data controller. You can do whatever you want. We have SQL, we have Hyperscale. So all these scenarios are now up to date. But I did mention to you the modular approach and why we're taking this approach. When we started to develop these scenarios, it was pretty hard to understand, or it was pretty hard to build those in a modular fashion because data services back then was pretty far from GA. But now, as we are graduating and the product is becoming more and more mature as we go, we started to implement this method of streamlined automation approach or a modular approach. And how does that look like? So if I'll go, this is the GitHub repository that is the backend for the Jumpstart project, and I want to show you some code here. So I'll go into the data services section, and I'm just going to select one of those deployments, right? So I'll take the GKE one, and I'll go to let me go to AKS, probably an easier example here. So this is an ARM template-based deployment, right? ARM template, super straightforward. And I'll go here to artifacts. I have an example to a parameters file. And in the parameters file for this ARM template, and this is an example, so all the values that you're seeing here are unusable, so just if you're trying something. But you can see here that we implement in those two Booleans, deploy SQL managed instance and deploy parse with SQL. And what those Booleans are, it gives the user the choice of what is it that he wants to deploy as part of the scenario. And once he will choose either true or false for either, the automation will take care of everything. And eventually it will deploy whatever it is that the user asked for. And maybe to dive one level deeper when it comes to this one. So this is the data services logon script. This is the script that runs every time you are logging into a client machine, right? Every data services scenario also include what we call a client VM, right? Or a Jumpbox VM. And these VMs are where all the operations and the managements are being done from. And here, if I'll scroll all the way, you can see these flags, right? And these are the flags that I was referring to. So the ARM templates, what we're doing, we're translating the user input, and then we're injecting that into the automation scripts. And eventually, this is how things are getting done. And the main reason that we wanted to do that is also for us, for our own testing and benchmarks, but also for the users to be able to just pick and choose whatever it is that they want to do. But we also have the individual scenarios, which is the dedicated READMEs for them to look, to have a closer look on what is it that they're about to do. So this is really the modular streamlined approach. And the last thing that I wanna show you is the ArcBox deployment for a second, because you also talked about Grafana, so I think it's pretty interesting to see. So this is an ArcBox deployment. ArcBox, like I said, an opinionated sandbox. Everything is deployed for you using either the Azure portal or Azure CLI. And eventually, when you're deploying ArcBox, you're getting everything configured for you, right? Like I said, servers, Kubernetes, data services. But really, if I'll go into the data studio that is also deployed for you, you can also see that we are configuring the connections to the data services for you. In this case, obviously, SQL Managed Instance and Postgres. And if I'll open those, you can see that we're also restoring the AdventureWorks database.
Nice.
just for you to have some fun, right? Right after the deployment, so you won't have to take care of, okay, let me restore a database and do this and do that. Like, we wanted to make sure that you have this, this cool experience. And the last piece, when it comes to this, when you're deploying data services, you're also getting Grafana out of the box, right, for metrics and monitoring operations, and you're also getting Kibana for login operations. And I thought that it's really interesting that you brought up this the Grafana blog that people wrote, because there's not a lot of information out there when it comes to data services and Grafana. It's kind of a hidden feature, I want to say. Not hidden, but it's something that people should take advantage of even more. So if you're not familiar with that, go check it out as part of your deployment. And basically, we're showing you in the scenario how to get to that. But the thing that I wanted to show you is, the dashboards that you're getting out of the box. And I find it very interesting, like, kind of look at those SQL Managed Instance dashboards and all
sweet.
that,
Mm-hmm.
and as part of those stress testing and benchmark tools that I was referring to, what we want to provide our users is a way to actually simulate failure, simulate stress, and not just do that, but also show their customers or, in their organizations, how does that actually look like from an operational standpoint? So that's really what I have to show you today. And this is the Grafana dashboard that is coming out of the box.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lior. This has been really interesting, and I hope people will go take a look. Again, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Anna.
Of course. Last but certainly not least, I'm going to bring up Marisa. Hey, Marisa. And we are going to talk about some of the latest events. So I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, so let me quickly run through them. On August 14th, which is this Saturday, I believe, Buck is speaking at the Multi-Cloud for You. Next Tuesday, there are 2 user groups that we're speaking at. Drew is speaking at the one in Minnesota, and Buck speaking at the one in Tampa. And the fun thing about these user groups are that you don't actually have to be there. Now that they're all kind of virtual, you can tune in and listen to any session you'd like. And then on August 20th, Anna will actually be speaking at the WIT Data Science Beginners Day. And if you're interested in learning more about data science, that's the one to go to. In addition, next week, we have our next Data Exposed live episode. This is another one with the Azure SQL Security Series. And the following week, on August 25th, we have a deep dive on why and how customers are using Azure SQL Hyperscale. Anna mentioned this earlier, but a quick plug again, we have new Data Exposed episodes coming out every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific. So stay tuned for those. Was that quick?
Awesome. Yeah, that was quick. Thanks so much, Marisa. Always cool. And again, we'll have these in our blog so people can double click into all these events. Thanks again, Marisa.
Thanks.
Awesome. So we are nearing the end of our show, but I have a few more things I just have to share with you all. As you all know, I always have a module of the month on Microsoft Learn. Microsoft Learn is a great place to get hands-on on the latest and greatest Azure SQL, SQL Server, really any Microsoft technology. So today I'm promoting this module of deploying serverless APIs. So this walks through things like Azure Functions, Logic Apps, and Azure SQL Database. Again, with that free Azure Sandbox, you can get hands-on for free. Everything's kind of set up for you. So please go check that out. And then for my pick of the month, I'm actually going to pick that notebook, which I showed earlier, that had all of the different queries from Nico's Managed Instance blogs. I thought they were very simple, but also very informative. And for all of our SQL Server geeks out there, it was a great way to kind of get hands-on with that toolbox. And I was just looking at some of our comments. I love all the comments you guys put in, so thanks for engaging with us. But really, that's our show for today. Thanks so much for joining us today. We had a great show, a packed show. One last plug. If you want to see any of the details related to any of this, please head over to our news update blog. So it's just aka.ms/newsupdate. Thanks so much for joining us. Feel free to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.